Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's kick things off with a tale about how changing one key policy can unravel the very soul of a beloved summer camp. Our OP worked at an overnight camp specializing in tech skills for kids, programming, robotics, and all that geeky goodness. It was a place where both the campers and staff thrived in an environment fueled by passion and creativity. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. You must clock out at 5, or how to alienate an entire team doing free overtime. A couple of summers ago, I worked at an overnight summer camp program through a local college. Camp specialized in teaching kids technical skills like programming and robotics, and my role was to plan, create, and teach a week-long course on specific technologies. During the day, we focused on teaching, while the evenings were filled with typical camp activities. In the camp industry, it's typical to be paid a weekly rate. The hours worked could vary depending on whether or not you were on overnight shifts or helping with camp duties, so the weekly rate helped simplify things. Those working overnights received a premium, but most people considered the pay fair for a week's work. For my program, I taught a class about a set of hardware, and each student would take the hardware home with them at the end of the week. My job involved setting up the hardware, showing the students how to use it, and then letting them experiment with it by the end of the week. The problem was that the hardware was unreliable. Every day, a quarter of the class's hardware would break down. Some parts had about a 50% chance of failing within hours of installation. If a student's hardware worked perfectly, they were set. But many students had to cycle out their parts multiple times before everything was working properly. By the end of the program, I usually managed to get the hardware in good working order for all the students to take home. However, this came at a cost. Every night off, every break, and every free moment was spent in the classroom fixing malfunctioning hardware. The parents and students expected everything to be functioning by the end of the week, and I understood that responsibility. After all, I was getting paid for a week's work, so I spent my free time fixing things, even though it was frustrating. But the parents were always happy when their kids went home with working hardware. It wasn't just me putting in extra effort. Counselors often worked on camp activities during their off hours, helping with pranks, skits, and other fun events. Even if we weren't technically on duty, we were still contributing to the camp experience. It made the whole environment more enjoyable for both campers and staff. Those summers were some of the most rewarding experiences I've had. However, when the next season rolled around, significant changes were announced. The administration informed us that instead of the usual weekly rate, we'd now be paid by the hour. This caught everyone off guard. Weekly rates had been standard in the industry, and the change seemed odd. We heard rumors that a former employee had complained about being overworked and underpaid, but no one could confirm that. To clarify, the issue with the weekly rate is that when divided by the hours worked, it can seem like a ripoff, but in most cases, camp jobs involve hanging out with kids, and often it's a laid-back environment. The weekly rate typically ended up being higher than what you'd make working a regular 40-hour minimum wage job. Despite my initial confusion, the camp director assured us that the new hourly rate was actually higher than our previous weekly pay when considering the number of hours worked. Excited about the potential pay raise, I went into the season hopeful. The first day was business as usual, but the real shift happened when they told us we had to clock out by 5 p.m. if we weren't working overnight shifts. Most of us understood this as meaning we should clock out when our tasks were finished, but it quickly became clear that they wanted us to stop working at 5 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. At 5:12, I was still cleaning up my classroom when an admin came in. Admin, what are you doing? Me, just cleaning up. Then I have to... Admin, did you clock out? Me, well, no, I still... Admin, you must clock out at 5. A switch flipped in my brain. I wasn't being paid for a week's work anymore. Now I was being paid by the hour, and they wouldn't allow me to go over my allotted hours. So I responded, "Okay, sounds good." I left the room, locking the door behind me. Admin, don't do it again or you'll be written up. It didn't take long for us to realize that the administration's plan was to cut everyone's pay. By offering a higher hourly rate, they convinced most of us to come back, believing we were getting a raise. But in reality, we were forced to work fewer hours. Everyone's weekly pay ended up being significantly less than it had been in previous years. Additionally, the overnight counselors who did less work were making more because they were being paid the same hourly rate despite doing significantly less preparation and effort. Everyone was frustrated. It became clear that once our shift ended, we were expected to be done for the day. The skits, activities, and extra work we used to do outside of our shifts stopped. Those with nights off would retreat to their rooms or go out. With no incentive to go the extra mile, the camp experience started to lose its magic. For my class, this meant I stopped fixing hardware during my free time. I would only repair it during class hours, which slowed things down significantly. By the end of the first program, we only managed to cover about half the material, and 20% of the students went home with non-functioning hardware. I felt terrible, but I wasn't going to work for free anymore. The camp received a wave of angry emails from parents. Fortunately, my colleagues stood by me, understanding the amount of time I had spent fixing the hardware. But that summer was a turning point. The magic that made the camp special was lost, replaced by frustration and dissatisfaction. Many veterans, including directors and leads, left by the end of the summer. The camp continued, but for my friends and me, it was no longer the place we loved. The magic was gone, and we learned a hard lesson. When the work environment changes, so does the spirit of the work. The classic case of fixing what isn't broken backfiring spectacularly. The administration's attempt to save money by implementing hourly pay instead of weekly wages completely missed the heart of what made the camp experience special. The extra effort, passion, and camaraderie staff put in after hours. By treating the job like a punch-in, punch-out gig, they not only devalued the staff's dedication, but also sabotaged the very fabric of what made the camp enjoyable for everyone involved. And our next story. No HOA, no problem. Outwitting Karen and Bob. About 10 years ago, my wife and I purchased our first home. At 26, we were the youngest couple in the neighborhood, excited to start this new chapter. Most of the neighbors were fine, friendly enough, or kept to themselves, but then there was her, the entitled, nosy, and borderline delusional woman next door, who we'll call Karen. Her husband, whom I'll refer to as Bob, was no better, an angry blind man who was always muttering ominous things under his breath. The trouble started when we decided to fix up the landscaping bordering Karen and Bob's property. The previous owner left a mess, rocks everywhere, overgrown bushes, and a janky little path made of pavers. We put in hours of hard work moving the rocks, laying fabric, and building a retaining wall. By the time we were done, the area looked great. Karen, however, wasn't impressed. She stomped over one afternoon as I was finishing up. Karen, I use that path to walk between our houses. You need to put it back. Me, the sidewalk's literally a few feet away. You can use that. Karen, well, when are you going to fix the rocks on my side? I blinked, stunned. Me, I'm not. That's your property. Karen, but you fixed yours. It's only fair. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. Fall rolled into winter, and Karen's entitlement only grew. She cornered me one day to inform me that the previous owner used to shovel her driveway and walkway for free. I wasn't inclined to pick up the tradition, especially since she'd been nothing but rude. When the snow fell, she started making snide comments about how lazy I was. But the real drama kicked off midwinter. One morning, we found a note taped to our door. Your fence has fallen onto our property, and we cannot get out of our house. The wording was so dramatic that I laughed. Still, I went to check. Sure enough, a few sections of the wooden fence between our properties had toppled over and were leaning against their house. I called my dad for help, and together we dismantled the broken sections, cleaned up the debris, and put up a temporary fence to keep the dogs contained until spring, when I could fix it properly. The next day, Karen and Bob were outside inspecting the temporary fence with scowls that could curdle milk. My wife and I walked over to see what was going on. Karen, this is not acceptable. Me, it's temporary. It'll do until spring. Karen, you need to fix your fence immediately. Me, excuse me? I'm not required to do anything right now. Karen, that fence was here before your house even existed. You have to replace it with a 6-foot privacy fence. I laughed. Me, Actually, my house was built before yours. I have the documents to prove it. And there's no law or HOA rule requiring a 6-foot privacy fence. Karen's face turned red. Karen: then why am I sending checks to the HOA every month? Me: I have no idea. The HOA disbanded decades ago. Karen: figures you wouldn't pay your dues. You're the worst neighbor. Bob chimed in, his tone menacing. Bob: if you don't fix that fence, I'll tear it down myself. Let's see what happens when your dog gets onto my property. I stepped closer, my voice low and firm. Me: touch my fence or harm my dog, and I'll make sure you end up behind bars. Don't test me. A few days later, code enforcement showed up to inspect the fence. Karen and Bob must have filed a complaint. After a thorough inspection, the officer informed them that there was no violation. However, as the officer walked back to his car, I pointed out something interesting. Their backyard was overrun with 6-foot-tall weeds, many of which were classified as noxious and required removal by state law. Karen's smug smile disappeared when code enforcement informed them they had 30 days to clean up their yard or face fines. Watching her struggle to drag trash bags of weeds to the curb was pure satisfaction. By spring, I fixed the fence properly on my terms, not theirs. Karen glared at me from her porch the entire time, but she didn't dare say a word. I also installed a camera facing the property line, just in case Bob got any ideas about tearing down my fence. Over time, their grumbling subsided, though they never stopped being the unpleasant, entitled neighbors they'd always been. To this day, I still smile when I think about Karen hauling those weeds, muttering curses under her breath. Karen and Bob sound like the ultimate nightmare neighbors, entitled, hostile, and completely lacking in self-awareness. From her delusions about the HOA to his veiled threats, it's like they were competing to see who could be the most insufferable. The mental image of Karen muttering curses as she wrestled with her yard weeds will probably keep me smiling all day. Here's to more peaceful days on your property and fewer encounters with Karen and Bob. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.